Hey, I've booted up my copy of Pokemon Platinum recently, and I gotta say, it's pretty boring. Like, something just doesn't seem to be hitting like it did when I was younger. Oh yeah? What Pokemon have been on your team? Oh, my starter, Luxray, Staraptor, Garchomp. Could this potentially be you, using the same Pokemon over and over again throughout your various playthroughs of the game? Johto Elite Four member Karen once said that a Pokemon's strength is irrelevant, and that you should always train up and try to win with your favorites. I've played a lot of Pokemon over the years, potentially hundreds of playthroughs of these games, therefore hundreds of teams. And trying out new Pokemon on these teams has always been one of the joys of playing. Recently, my brothers Garchomp and Jarmangander finished playthroughs with Fire Red where we had full RNG decide the makeup of our teams. We played through the games and fought at the end after a set amount of time. My team consisted of a Nidoqueen, Lapras, Kabutops, Magneton, Scyther, and Hitmonlee. This ragtag group of Mons ended up sweeping both of my opponents in both best 2 out of 3 contests, thanks in no small part to the absolute behemoth Lapras is. Playing through this time around got me thinking, what are some Pokemon I've used in games that may fall a little under the radar? What are those B-tier Pokemon that someone out there may just love to have on their team, but never considered it for whatever reasons? I decided to find some of these Pokemon and offer them up to you all as options that you might consider in your next playthrough of a given game. I'll go down the list starting in Gen 1 with Red, Blue, and Yellow, and choosing one Pokemon from every major group of games, and talking about why I think that they could be a fun Pokemon to include next time you play. I'll be selecting Pokemon that don't often get enough spotlight. I'll also be restricting Mons to only the region in which they were introduced. These Pokemon selections are intended to be part of your teams for the majority of the playthrough, so I'll try and make sure that the Pokemon featured isn't an endgame Mon. As we're hopping in, I'd love if you guys showed this video some love with a like, a subscribe, and let me know about some unorthodox Pokemon that you've used on a team before. With all that out of the way, let's talk about Pokemon Red, Blue, and Yellow. My first ever Pokemon game, and video game for that matter, was Pokemon Red version. I've played through it numerous times, and one thing is for certain, at least someone in your team has got to know Psychic. The Psychic type is far and away the best type in those games, but using an Alakazam or Exeggutor can get repetitive, so I'll offer up something different, Venomoth. Venonat can be found midway through your playthrough of Gen 1, at least requiring the Pokeflute. This bug poison type is a whole lot of fun to use. I've always loved this design, and just as I mentioned before, its access to Psychic. At level 50 it learns the move naturally, but can also learn it via TM if you're hoping to skip the grind. It also learns Mega Drain, the powder moves, and a bunch of other things that make it stand out in Gen 1. The move pools back then were famously shallow, so it's cool to have a Psychic user that isn't just a one-trick pony. As you'll see throughout the bulk of this video, most of my list is informed by nostalgia. Venomoth is an important Pokemon to me, since it was actually the first ever shiny Pokemon that I ever encountered, way back potentially 15 years ago in the Safari Zone in Fire Red. Sadly, it fled, along with all of my hopes and dreams. That being said, Venomoth is certainly a great Pokemon to consider adding to your next playthrough of Pokemon Red, Blue, or Yellow. Next up, let's talk about Gold, Silver, and Crystal. Gold and Silver both offer the player one of the best early route Pokemon in the history of the franchise in Ampharos. Having such early access to a 3-stage electric type is a no-brainer for most teams. It's almost guaranteed that at some point, if you've played a lot of Gen 2, that you'll have used at least one. But what if you want your water weaknesses covered without using the same Pokemon again? Well, the Pokemon I'd like to recommend is Palossand. Oddish can be found very early on in a playthrough of Gen 2 in Ilex Forest, and from there it can be used to give your opponent status effects as itself or as a Gloom. Not too long after picking it up, just north of Goldenrod City, is the bug catching contest. First place here will grant you a Sunstone, giving you a fully evolved Palossand not too long after first encountering it. This is all under the assumption that you don't get cheesed out of that stupid contest. I'm looking at you, bug catcher Nick. What do you mean your Kakuna beat my Scyther? I know what you did. Back to Palossand and disregarding my bug-related trauma. This Pokemon can certainly prove to be a valuable member of your team. While the Grass type doesn't have any express advantages over most of the major fights in Johto, having easy access to Stab, Giga Drain, and status moves is certainly something to be considered. Moving on to Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, we've had a lot of additions to Pokemon that really change a lot of core aspects of the franchise. abilities and natures can make Pokemon that you would normally consider much more viable. Gen 3 is quite a bit different from other games in that I feel like a stereotypical team isn't as prevalent. I think that this can be attributed to an incredibly diverse range of wild Pokemon. But one specific Pokemon cements itself as a staple in these games, Gardevoir. It's not surprising that Gardevoir is on so many Gen 3 teams. It's unbelievably strong and has access to some of the best moves in the game like Calm Mind and Thunderbolt. But it's not the only Psychic type in Gen 3. So for these games, I'll recommend Claydol. Claydol is a ground Psychic type with the ability Levitate, making its switch-in potential much better. It's a bulky, defensive-based mixed attacker, a real jack-of-all-trades, which can come in handy in Gen 3. It's also relatively fast with a base speed of 75. It's nothing to necessarily write home about, but fun fact, Steven's Claydol is the single fastest Pokemon you will encounter in a trainer battle in Hoenn. Since at this point in Pokemon's history, types were still locked into being physical or special, having someone that can hit just as hard with both can come in handy. This isn't even taking into account Claydol's incredible move pool, with access to Psychic, Shadow Ball, Earthquake, and Ice Beam. Claydol's pre-evolution Baltoy can be found in the desert of Route 111 after beating the 4th gym. If using a Gardevoir is getting boring every time you play through Ruby, Sapphire, Emerald, I think Claydol could certainly be a good pickup. Circling back to Kanto, we get to talk about Fire Red and Leaf Green, which may be my favorite and certainly most played Pokemon games of all time. Fire Red and Leaf Green drop us into Kanto with some major developments in gameplay. Since Gen 2, Pokemon could hold items, and some of these items can completely change how a Pokemon performs, and some Pokemon have exclusive items to help them in battle. One such Pokemon is Marowak. Cubone can be found in Pokemon Tower after only 3 gyms after a bit of searching. The search may take you a little bit longer though, because it is critical that you find Cubone's exclusive item, the Thick Club. With only a 5% rate of that club being there, it may take a bit, but seriously, it can be worth it. The Thick Club will double Marowak's attack stat, double it, making it hit harder than a truck. On top of that, Marowak can have the ability Rock Head, negating recoil damage, making it the ultimate option for Double Edge. Stab Earthquake with effectively 160 base attack, free Double Edge, this Pokemon can seriously be a beast. Marowak is tragically slow, so that can't hold it back. So maybe some speed investment in the form of a Jolly Nature and some EV training could make it nearly untouchable. The biggest thing holding it back is certainly the time involved. Finding just the right Cubone with the right nature and ability will be a grind, and then finding the Thick Club on top of that could dissuade someone from going all in on Marowak, but I still think that it's a great choice for your team in your next playthrough of Fire Red or Leaf Green. Leaving the Game Boy behind, it's time to talk about some DS games. Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum introduced some of my favorite Pokemon in the history of the series, mostly because a significant chunk of the ones introduced are evolutions of old Pokemon that needed them. Magmortar, Rhyperior, Weavile, Gallade, Electivire, all of these Pokemon are incredibly powerful, and I'm sure that you've filled your team with them. This massive crop of powerful evolutions of old Pokemon tends to overshadow what is a great group of original Pokemon in Gen 4. Aside from that, Gen 4 has the worst case of the stereotypical team. Like I mentioned at the start of the video, it's a well-known meme that the basic Gen 4 team consists of your starter, Staraptor, Luxray, Garchomp, and sometimes I see Floatzel thrown in the mix. So I want to highlight a Pokemon that I love that I don't see mentioned as much, Toxicroak. Croagunk can be found midway through the game in the Great Marsh in Pastoria City, though depending on the game you're playing, it is possible to skip a few gyms and come and get it right before you go all in. It'll take a bit to evolve your Croagunk into Toxicroak since it evolves at level 37, but that investment can certainly be worth it. Toxicroak has access to an incredible variety of attacking moves like Poison Jab, Brick Break, X-Scissor, and Earthquake, and some setup moves like Bulk Up and, most excitingly, Swords Dance. This much utility with setup and move pool diversity means Toxicroak could certainly be a crutch that you rely on in your game. And just look how cool it is, and why wouldn't you want to use the Super Frog with single Wolverine claws? Now going back to Johto with Heart Gold and Soul Silver, I wanted to make sure to choose a Pokemon that benefited from the remake, specifically a Pokemon that gains a lot from the newer moves introduced since its original entrance into the game. The Water type is among the best in the series, and has been for a long time. A major reason for this is the abundance of incredible Pokemon that have it. In Johto, you have choices between so many great water types. Kingdra and Feraligatr come to mind specifically, on top of the ones that were introduced back in Kanto, like Starmie, and let's not forget the free shiny Gyarados that you get. But what if I told you you might have even more fun with a Slowking? Slowking is actually crazy. Let me tell you about some of the moves they can get in Heart Gold and Soul Silver. Psychic and Surf, obviously, Nasty Plot, Power Gem, Ice Beam, Shadow Ball, Thunder Wave, the Screens, and Flamethrower? Flamethrower? You're telling me that our good friend Slowking here is a frickin' pyro? Look at this diversity. Alongside Nasty Plot, you could potentially use Slowking to play through really any type combination. Is he slow? Well, yeah, it's in the name. But Trick Room is also a potential option starting in Gen 4. You're also able to encounter Slowpoke ridiculously early, in, of all places, Slowpoke well, meaning that you can have it on your team before challenging the second gym. The King's Rock, which is necessary to evolve Slowpoke into Slowking, is found in that same location, but it is inaccessible until you acquire the HM for Surf a couple of gyms later. Since it is a trait evolve, you can potentially get it at a much lower level than you would its counterpart Slowbro, which evolves at level 37. With hitting Stab, Surfs, and Psychics, and having the ability to Nasty Plot into some other coverage moves, Slowking can honestly handle really any threat that Heart Gold and Soul Silver can throw at it. For those reasons, I feel it is totally fair that it sits on this list. Black and White wasn't very hard to nail down. This Pokemon for me is among my favorites for the generation, but it gets overshadowed by some others. In Black and White, if you don't use a Samurott, it's a pretty cut and dry which water type you'll most likely end up running. Seismitoad is available within the first 2 gyms as a Temple outside Pinwheel Forest. It's a bulky water ground type that is a no-brainer on a run of Black and White, unless you use a Carracosta. You know why?
It'd be a lot cooler if you did.
Carracosta gets overshadowed by Seismitoad's availability and its exclusive relationship with Archeops, the other fossil Pokemon from Gen 5. Carracosta is also a physical attacker, meaning it doesn't make full use of Scald and certain other water-type moves. But it's so cool! I absolutely love Carracosta's design and love the times that I've used one on my team. Since it's a physical attacker, it hits harder with Stab Rock-type moves, and it also has access to Earthquake. It's also acquired relatively early on in the game, since Tortuga's fossil can be found in the Relic Castle after Castelia City. You'll just need to backtrack to Nacrene in order to resurrect your ancient turtle. It also resurrects at level 25, meaning you're not cursed with a massive grind like you would be in Fire Red and Leaf Green with Ammonite or Kabuto. Carracosta can be a massive help going into the later game, doing super effective damage to the 5th, 6th, and 7th gym leaders. With all that in mind, I hope that you consider it for your next run of Black and White. When going over to the sequels of Black 2 and White 2, I wanted to choose a Pokemon that is able to be used earlier than it is in Black and White. While Mienshao is available in the same location on Route 14 as it is in Black and White, in the sequels you end up getting there a little bit earlier than you would in the originals, and Mienshao is so worth it. With base 125 attack and 105 speed, Mienshao is equipped to seriously cripple most other Pokemon teams. On top of that, with access to Regenerator, which heals your Pokemon for a third of their health every time they switch out, and the move U-Turn, it can be seriously annoying for enemy trainers. The only major downside, and it is major, is that Mienshao does not evolve until, wait for it, level 50! It really is one of the worst things about Gen 5 that they decide to design evolution methods around when in the game you'll encounter the Pokemon, leading to situations like this where you're stuck with a Mienshao for a significant chunk of your playthrough. Not that there's anything wrong with Mienshao, I guess. Mienshao is just such a good Pokemon to use in a playthrough of Gen 5, but it gets held back by its late availability. By the time you reach it, it's not uncommon that you'll have already found a full team of 6 by that point. So next time you head to Unova, save a spot on your team for this fighting ferret. On to X and Y and Pokemon's first entries in 3D. Gen 6 is the smallest generation as far as new Pokemon introduced, but a lot of those that were made are bangers.
And I know bangers!
A lot of people have very fond memories using Pokemon like Talonflame, Noivern, Pangoro, Aegislash, and Tyrantrum on their teams. Since there's so few, it's hard sometimes to find Pokemon that slip through the cracks. Malamar, I feel, is one such Pokemon. The Malamar line is the first ever to have the dual typing of Dark and Psychic. Such a cool and unique typing, as well as being physically oriented, leads to a cool move pool. Malamar gets access to Trick Room, the Screens, Night Slash, Psycho Cut, and a whole lot of other things. The best part about it though is Malamar's ability Contrary, making it so that anytime Malamar's stats are augmented, the opposite effect happens. Contrary can make Malamar the worst nightmare of any Intimidate user, and given that Malamar can use the move Superpower, it can seriously start going off if you let it. Inkay can be found very early on in a playthrough of X and Y, since it is found right before the second gym. That being said, the way that Kalos is set up, half the game takes place before the second gym. Look at Route 7.
Damn, boy, he's sick, boy!
Inkay evolves at level 30 with the unique requirement that you're holding your 3DS upside down when you get it up to that level. So just remember that if you're hoping to use this Lovecraftian brain squid on your team. And I sure hope you do, because I know that I've had a lot of fun using Malamar in my team in the past. In Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire, we get the opportunity to circle back to the Hoenn region. This time around, we get to enjoy the region with more modern features, namely the physical special split. There were many Pokemon in Gen 3 that seriously suffered because of the lack of moves to support their typing and their stats. Shiftry seriously sucked back in Ruby and Sapphire. First off, its physical attack is better than its special attack by about 10 points, but would you look at that, both Grass and Dark type were designated as special types before Gen 4. So no matter what, your Shiftry is not going to do as well as you'd like with its stab moves. And what are those stab moves, you may ask? The best Dark type move Shiftry had any access to at that time was Feint Attack. 60 damage isn't going to cut it if you want to be taken seriously in any way. And that's only if you teach it to Shiftry as a Nuzleaf, because if you evolved it before it learned Feint Attack, you can kiss your stab effectiveness goodbye. Unless you were really riding on Thief, the 40 damage alternative. When looking at its grass moves, it's not a whole lot better. Nuzleaf was restricted to essentially using Bullet Seed as its primary grass move for the majority of the playthrough. It was really only after the 6th gym that you could realistically get the TM for Giga Drain, which was also only a 60 base power in Gen 3, so no matter what, your stab options were lacking. And if you wanted any coverage, you'd have to delay your Nuzleaf until level 49 to get extra sensory, which was at least something. So all in all, Shiftry's move pool in Gen 3 was absolutely shallow. So how much better is it in the remakes? Stab, Physical, Leaf Blade, and Seed Bomb for your grass type, Foul Play and Payback for your dark type, Swords Dance for setup, and things like X Scissor and Brick Break for coverage. Shiftry is a whole different beast in this game. C-Dot isn't exclusive to Omega Ruby, but I just had to select it for this spot since Shiftry is somewhat usable in this game finally. It's available long before you even fight the first gym in Rustboro City. You can find the little guy in the grass of Route 102 alongside routes. Since C-Dot evolves at level 14, it's entirely possible to have evolved it into a Nuzleaf before you fight Roxanne. It's a while before you find a Leaf Stone, but I would not rush that anyway, because you don't want to miss out on some of those sweet moves. With all that being said, I really think that Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire is Shiftry's time to shine. Give good old Jiraiya a chance. Now Gen 7 is interesting, because just like X and Y, Sun and Moon introduced relatively few Pokemon. A major reason for this is that alongside the new Pokemon were many regional forms of old Pokemon. Fans usually get really excited to use the awesome Alolan forms of Marowak and Ninetales that maybe the new Pokemon don't get as much love. Alola introduced one of my favorite Pokemon of all time, the bug water type Golisopod. Golisopod is a total behemoth and is so much fun to use. You can seriously feel the power when you're throwing stab liquidations at your enemy. So you must be wondering, why are you talking about Golisopod? It's already relatively popular. Well, I'm not going to be talking about Golisopod. I'm going to be talking about its less pretty cousin, Araquanid. It really is strange that we get two sets of two-stage water bug types in the same generation, and Araquanid is a really interesting Pokemon. It's hard to differentiate yourself and find your niche when there is a much stronger version of you in your same gen. So what does Araquanid bring to the table? Is it stats? Not really. A base stat total of 454 is barely passable, especially compared to Golisopod's 530. Araquanid's move pool is alright, but the big draw to it is its unique ability, Water Bubble. Araquanid's ability completely prevents burning, halves all damage taken from fire-type moves, making it a safe switch-in, and on top of that, it gives your water moves a 100% damage boost, and that's before stab is taken into consideration, essentially making it so Araquanid's water moves are always hitting hard. So essentially, it's a safe switch that can then devastate a team with water moves that are doing over double damage. Araquanid is such a low-key Pokemon that on my first ever playthrough of Pokemon Moon, its pre-evolved Dewpider hid completely under the radar to the extent that I never encountered it until after I'd already seen Araquanid. Turns out Dewpider is actually found in Brooklet Hill, around where you take on that Totem Wishy-Washy. I wouldn't blame you for not even running into this Pokemon, I did the same when I first played the game. With the Ultra games from Gen 7, I have half a mind to say Araquanid again, because when it comes down to it, these are 95% the same games. But that wouldn't be as fun now, would it? So I decided to look at some teams that I've had in the past and choose a Pokemon I remember having a uniquely fun time using. One specifically fun Pokemon I remember using was Palossand. Now, Palossand is great, and not just because it has one of the best shinies in Pokemon history, but because this is genuinely a really solid mon. Palossand is a special attacker, with access to Earth Power and Shadow Ball, giving it some solid stab options, as well as Giga Drain to take care of water types, which you'll want to be sending this thing out against every now and then, because with Palossand's unique ability Water Compaction, its defense will be raised 2 stages every time it's hit with a water move. Palossand is not going to be moving first in most cases, since it has a base speed of 35. Gosh, Gen 7 is so slow. But I still think that the Spooky Sandcastle is worth a shot. Its first stage, Sandygast, is found a good chunk of the way into the game on Hano Beach, but the biggest investment will be evolving it, since Sandygast doesn't evolve until level 42, so good luck! Now let's go. Pikachu and Eevee saw Pokemon's official transition to the Nintendo Switch console. In establishing itself on the new hardware, Kanto was selected to be where we go back to. Again. We're back to selecting a member of the original 151, someone that potentially benefits from the addition of the physical special split. The Let's Go games are essentially remakes of Pokemon Yellow, and in Yellow you could receive a free Bulbasaur, Charmander, and Squirtle. Literally free options like these can make it hard to even consider other Pokemon that overlap types. But if you're feeling a little crazy, maybe you need a Poliwrath in your life. Look, I know what you're saying, Jarvitar. There's so many other better water types in Kanto, like Starmie and Cloyster, Vaporeon, and Gyarados. And to that, I say, yeah, you're right. Poliwrath is it's okay. Its stats are pretty mid, and it has no real defining characteristics that separate it as a Pokemon. However, it is really cool. And viability isn't everything. If viability mattered, half the Pokemon in this list would be gone. What Poliwrath has is a solid dual typing with Water Fighting, access to pretty good stab with Waterfall and Brick Break, as well as Ice Punch, which could actually come in handy when it's time to fight Lance. It also has the ability Water Absorb, meaning you can use it for some safe switches against Lorelei. So yeah, that's my case for Poliwrath. You can take it or leave it. You seriously can't go wrong with it. Now Sword and Shield actually have some great Pokemon, especially on the early routes before you even get into the game. So many Sword and Shield teams will end up having a Corviknight, Dreadnought, and Orbeetle. It's a lot like Gen 4 honestly with how consistent that can be. I've made my own feelings regarding regional evolutions well known in the past, watch this video for some context, but spoiler alert, I'm not a fan, mostly because of the sake of availability. In that same video I talked a little bit about one of my favorite Pokemon from Gen 8, and I've decided to bring it up again here to sing its praises. It's my Onion Knight, Sirfetch'd. I love this duck. My most recent playthrough of Sword had this guy as my undisputed MVP. He was so much fun to have on my team. There really aren't a whole lot of crazy tricks to it, just a lot of power and those sweet critical hits. Just like Marowak had a unique item that helped it out, Sirfetch'd benefits from the Leak, which exclusively for it raises its crit chance by 2 stages. Couple that with a move that already has a high crit chance like Leaf Blade or Night Slash, and you'll be hitting crits left and right. Sirfetch'd is a really simple Pokemon to just throw out and do some damage with. It has all the tools necessary in a pinch, and was easily the star of my last run. Galarian Farfetch'd is a Pokemon Sword exclusive and can be found relatively quickly on Route 5. Its method of evolution is very strange. requiring you to hit 3 critical hits in one battle. With the leak, this is more than possible, but still very interesting. There's a part of me that wishes that there were more cool evolution methods like this. At any rate, the Duck is a great Pokemon to pick up for your next playthrough in Gen 8. Now, Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, essentially ports of the old games to the Switch. They may as well be the same games except for a few key differences. In this case, it's the Grand Underground. The replacement of Diamond and Pearl's normal underground with the added feature of wild encounters in specific areas. These encounters are actually really great and make available Pokemon that were nearly impossible to acquire in the original games. The Grand Underground rights the wrongs and heals the trauma caused by Gen 4's Honey Trees. Let me level with you real quick. There were seriously like 8 whole evolution lines entirely exclusive to these stupid trees, and you could wait hours between encounters. Relying on any of them was a guaranteed ticket to insanity. The Grand Underground makes the bulk of these encounters viable, so I wanted to choose a Pokemon that was specifically hard to acquire due to the old mechanic, in Vespiquen. Back in the day, if you wanted the Queen Bee, you had to lather a honey tree, wait a day, and hope against hope that the Combee appeared. But that wasn't the end. Not only did you need a Combee, which was already rare enough, you needed a female Combee, which has, get ready for it, a 1 in 8 chance to be female. So yeah, forget that. I'd rather use a different bug type. But now in BDSP, we can actually get a female Combee in a relatively okay time frame. So now I can actually recommend using one. Vespiquen is a pretty gimmicky Pokemon, with lots of exclusive moves that determine how it is used. Attack Order is actually one of the best bug type moves in the game with 80 power and a high crit rate. And Defend Order is a good setup move that boosts Vespiquen's already great defenses. The second you get into the underground after getting to Eterna City, you essentially can get Combee at any time. From there you don't really have a long grind ahead of you. Combee evolves at level 21, just make sure you grab the female one. In a game with the EXP share permanently on like BDSP, you shouldn't have any issue. For finally being a viable option, I felt like Vespiquen was an obvious pickup in this case. Flashing back 100 years or so in Pokemon Legends Arceus, we saw a few new Pokemon and new regional forms. There aren't a whole lot to choose from, but I felt like I had a good idea of what to pick. My first playthrough of Legends, I knew that I was going to use Rowlet as my starter, and I was more than pleased with Hisuian Decidueye. The switch from Grass Ghost to Grass Fighting was very interesting, but with that typing, it made it completely pointless to also use the new Hisuian Lilligant. Really, up until Legends Arceus, we only had 3 Grass Fighting types, then we get 2 more dropped on us out of only a few new Pokemon. In subsequent playthroughs, I have used Hisuian Lilligant, and I have really enjoyed my time. It can do most of the things that Decidueye can do, but not really as well, but it has access to many of the same stab moves, and specifically, it's much faster, beating it by nearly 40 base speed. If you're hoping for a physical grass type in Legends Arceus and you felt that Decidueye was a bit too slow, I'd recommend trying out Lilligant. Petalil can be found relatively easy in the flower fields of the Crimson Mirelands, but you'll need to also dig up a Sunstone using Ursaluna. With all that fresh knowledge being sent straight into your brain, it's about time to wrap up this list with our last Pokemon in the newest games, Scarlet and Violet. I'm gonna be honest, this Pokemon is so unbelievably slept on. It's stupid strong, really unique, really cool, and easily available. Nobody talks about it, but it's literally the regional bird of Paldea, Kilowattrel. Kilowattrel has been the MVP of 2 of my different playthroughs in Gen 9. Like, seriously, this bird is so goated. It's one of very few electric flying types, and it's one of the most viable. It's ridiculously fast with a base speed of 125, so you'll essentially outspeed just about anything on the map at a certain point. And it hits pretty solid with 105 special attack. With its speed, it can make full use of Electro Ball, which it gets upon evolving at level 25. It's also the perfect Pokemon to use in the rain, since it gets access to Thunder and Hurricane and hits Stab with both. Like, for real, I'll sing the praises of this Pokemon all day. It is quickly becoming one of my favorite regional birds, like up there with Staraptor. I really can't say enough about Kilowattrel. It's a beast, and I hope it makes its way into your team sometime soon. With all that, I'm really glad to see that you stayed all the way to the end. One of the great joys of Pokemon is the incredible variety that can be found on any given team. You never really know what Pokemon may be someone else's favorite. What are some Pokemon that you've used on your teams in the past that you loved? It it would be great to hear in the comments some of your favorites. If this type of video was something you're into, make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more. And if following the trading card game is also your thing, make sure to check out my brother, Jar Chomp Collectibles. And with that, peace out, Pokemon trainers.